When you're making those investment decisions, especially those critical investment decisions, you and Warren, your partner Warren Buffett, had such legendary partnership. Do you guys have disagreements, and how do you make those decisions?
We never have an unpleasant disagreement. Occasionally we start from the same facts and have slightly different views, and we solve our problem in those occasions by doing it his way. And some people say to me, how can you be so overbearing and domineering and unpleasant as you are, Charlie, and be in a subordinate position when you're dealing with Warren? And I say, well, Warren is not a normal human being. He is worth being a little subordinate to. He is really quite able.
Where would you invest your grandchildren's money?
The very word diversification, which is taught in every business school, is the holy golden grail. I consider almost asinine. I'm only interested in investing where I have some sort of advantage. And if I have the advantage in 3 different things, that's enough for any family. 3 wonderful things with the odds in your favor. And so I think the idea you have to have a big diversified portfolio, that's fine for the ignorant people to be fully diversified. But if you actually know what you're doing, I think 3 investments are plenty. And the Mungers, if you take Berkshire and Costco and Lilu's Asian fund, that's 90% of the money. I have been blessed with some very remarkable partners. How do you get a marvelous partner? It's a very simple trick. And here's what you do. You deserve a marvelous partner. By the way, it works in marriage too. It's a very simple formula.
There's so much wealth disparity in this world, and what are your thoughts? And I think also a lot of our young people, our youth, are fascinated with the socialism. They're talking about, universal basic income and a lot of the socialist concepts. What are your thoughts about wealth disparity of people who are very wealthy and there's still a lot of poverty in this world? And what are your thoughts about socialism? Charlie, would you like to start the conversation?
Well, it's not hard for me to be against socialism. When the Chinese had the land farmed in socialism, they were starving. And finally, a bunch of starving Chinese peasants got together and said, each one of us is going to take a farm for his own self. And even if we die, we're going to do it. And so they divided up the farms with each one having his own farm. And of course, the grain production went up like 20 times in the first year. And in a world where something like that can happen, if you're a pure socialist, you're a nutcase. An absolute nutcase, and not a modest nutcase, a real nutcase. So somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, both of them very smart people and both quite admirable in some ways, but they just never quite learned what Adam Smith, just some basic facts of life they didn't learn. We can't help, if we want a productive society, we can't help but have these personal incentives to handle your own affairs. And if you do that, you get unequal wealth outcomes. So the price of plenty is that you can't have socialism. That does not mean that the rich societies of the West can't have a bigger social safety net than they do. That's a perfectly permissible way to think. In fact, I would argue that it's evil not to be in favor of a reasonable social safety net if you're an affluent nation. And I don't think it matters a lot whether the top tax rate is 38% or 42% or 26%. I think when you get income taxes 60, 70, 80%, you get total perverse behavior and you start hurting the economy. So I think it's pretty simple. And of course we've got to have capitalism. And of course somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren is a little nuts. And they've got high IQs too. But one thing I've noticed in a long life is that you can be a perfect nut with a high IQ.
So since we're talking about politics before the dinner, let's finish the politics conversation. I think, Charlie, that's your favorite subject.
It's not my favorite group of people.
So, our president says that he is doing this very, not so very eloquent tweets by saying there's so much fake news, there is, biased media, and that's the reason why he is using Twitter as a medium to communicate. A lot of his tweets makes us a little bit cringe, but also we have so much bias in media and news out there. Where do you get your information? Where do you get your accurate, unbiased news?
I don't get any accurate, unbiased news. If there's any unbiased in my news, I'm supplying it myself. No, as a matter of fact, I've gotten so I find the ordinary news boring. So I switch from one idiot to another. And since we have one on each side of every issue, it's more interesting, and I'm old, and I like the blood to stir a little, and so I never go near the ordinary news. I go where these biased people are talking. But I listen to all of them. They're colorful.
Sure. So it's research when you listen to all of them.
Yes, and they're witty in kind of a nasty way. I imagine calling Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. You may not like Donald Trump, but he has a genius for rhetoric.
What is the best advice that you've received, and can you share that with us?
Well, I think I have an everlasting recipe, and that is to cope with whatever comes and work very hard at being rational. I really think if you talk about evil and mischance in the world, more trouble is caused by stupidity than is caused by malevolence. And so working constantly on the stupidity side of things is hugely constructive, and it's fun too. There's so much asininity out there, you can go hang out. And it's kind of fun to bat it down and serve the rational outcomes. So I think if you just cope with what comes and try and be rational all the way, that's all it's given us to do.
Thank you. Stuart.
Yeah, I think a bit of advice that I had that I try to look at is everybody's always looking at the upside. And I found that, you have plans, and the plans never work, okay? Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're worse. But I think the important thing is you worry about the downside. If you don't lose any money in any investments or businesses, that's a big benefit. I mean, if you make 15%, it's great, but if you make 7%, it's not so bad. But if you lose 20%, it's very hard to make that up. So when I look at a deal, I say, okay, I understand the upside. Tell me about the upside. That's interesting. What's the downside? What's the worst that can happen within reason? And that's what I look at to make sure that you don't get burned. And I've been burned, but hopefully not too often.